And thanks for everyone for attending today, taking some time out of your day to get the latest and greatest on Cisco and Microsoft Interop. This is hands down the hottest topic in the collaboration arena today, with the two behemoths in the space from a unified communications and conferencing perspective, working a lot closer together and closer than they've ever worked together before. For those who have attended the Cisco and Microsoft Interop sessions in the past, there will be a little bit of overlap or redundancy when we go through the historical side of this relationship. But for those who have attended, there'll be some new updates for you as well, along with a better update of what's coming soon. Accompanying me today are Tarek Sheikh, our Director of Collaboration Solutions, who is going to take you through the calling integration side of Cisco and Microsoft Solutions. And Dan Farrell, our collaboration architect, will be handling Q&A and adding color throughout. So with that, today's agenda, we're going to talk about why interoperability is important. First and foremost, it's pretty much mandated now today with these two platforms, and we're going to talk about why that is. We're going to focus on some architectural considerations and things that need to be top of mind for you when you're looking at bringing these two worlds together. Whether you haven't got started yet or you're somewhere down that path and on your journey, there's a lot to consider when you're integrating these two solutions. We're going to focus on user experience and how important it is to consider the end user when you're bringing these two solutions together. There's a number of different ways to do it. Cisco and Microsoft have always been good at giving their clients options. So depending on how you design and integrate the two platforms has a tremendous impact on user experience. We're going to focus on operations and what it's like to have both platforms up and running in your environment and the implications of that. We'll then take some time to go through the history. This has been a journey for both vendors for years, going back to the early 2000s. In mid 2000s, when Microsoft really started to get into more of the conferencing space, aside from just the messaging side of the house. We're going to focus on what's possible today with the latest and greatest of their two platforms, and then we're going to focus on what is coming. There'll be some demonstrations throughout. I know that's the last item here. We're not closing with demonstrations, but as we talk about certain topics or solution integrations that are possible today, we will show you what that's like. So with that, let's talk about why interoperability. So as I mentioned, it's not what customers demand. And there's a number of different reasons for that. Those reasons being identity. So think platforms like single sign-on and a user just getting access to their collaboration services, regardless of what solution they are using, to make it a better end user experience is one of the main drivers for interoperability between these solutions. Calendaring integration ends up being vital. Native calendaring via Exchange and Outlook in the Microsoft platform, everybody's used to. But the calendaring integration to the Cisco collaboration side of the house ends up being vital for a uniform experience as well. Meetings. We're definitely going to spend time talking about both meetings and video. Several organizations have both platforms. We know that, whether it's going back to the Skype or Link days or now Microsoft Teams in conjunction with WEBEX. And what does it take to bring those two worlds together, along with any video infrastructure or endpoints that may be on the network? Telephony. So telephony integration is becoming more and more popular with these two platforms so that individuals can stay in a singular pane of glass. We're going to focus on what is possible today and really let you know that you don't need to do a whole lot to take advantage of certain components of the integration, but for rich integrations, there's an architectural discussion and overhaul that you need to consider. Devices. And so how can we ensure that we get the device of choice or the device issued by your organization and that it just works the way that you need it to and take advantage of all of the collaboration services that are available? Messaging. So we don't focus a lot on bringing the Cisco and Microsoft messaging platforms together. While that's doable, it's done via middleware platform, and it's not as common because with messaging, it's hard to have two different platforms and live in two different platforms. So when we work with our clients, we talk about how can you truly get to one or the other when it comes to messaging. In the event that there's interop required between the two solutions, as I mentioned, that's doable. And if you think about ancillary applications or ecosystem solutions like contact center, all right, how can we ensure that interop exists there too? Presence, very, very important. When we get to this and we talk about what's possible today, Microsoft specifically still hasn't opened up the Presence API for vendors like Cisco to take advantage of that. All right, so there's certain gaps there in the portfolio today, but it ends up being a feature that we've all become very, very dependent on. There's tremendous value in presence. It's great to know when I'm out of the office. It's great to know when I'm on video. Even better for folks to know when I'm sharing content like I am right now. So how can we ensure that that goes across the entire umbrella of the collaboration solutions that you use? File collaboration. Arguably, why Microsoft Teams has gained the momentum and traction that it has. Most organizations are using the Microsoft Productivity Suite. Microsoft Teams obviously has rich integrations with their own productivity suite. Other solutions do as well. We'll show you with WEBEX Teams in their unified app how well they integrate with Microsoft's productivity suite, taking advantage of their APIs, and that'll be one of the demonstrations that we show you. Mobility and workflow end up being two of the main drivers of interoperability. Right, so we talked about consolidating those panes of glass and those applications that you live in. All right, so that's vital for workflow, but mobility being a driving factor. And if you look at what COVID has done, right, we need to be able to access our services regardless of where we are easily, seamlessly, right, with a wonderful experience. Security and compliance, arguably always the most important when you have multiple vendors, all the Cisco and Microsoft, who are very, very good security companies, in your environment at the same time. How can we ensure that when communication and collaboration is taking place between them, that you remain secure and compliant? So at the end of the day, everything just needs to work together, which is what this visualization depicts. Architectural considerations when you're looking at bringing Cisco and Microsoft unified communications platforms together. What technical options exist in each solution to achieve interoperability? You might just seem like, hey, I want to do messaging with Microsoft Teams and File Collab, and I'll leave the rich collaboration services like voice and video and conferencing over on the Cisco side. But I want to access through one pane of glass. Or I only want to use one phone. Or if I have both Apple and Android on my network, I only want to use that one app. But you need to know what technical options exist. These organizations leapfrog each other all the time in features. It's just known, it's always been that way. And the services themselves in this type of collaboration is becoming more and more commoditized. COVID has certainly made it commoditized. Right? Zoom went from 10 million users to 400 million. Right? Folks that didn't even know how to use it before. Right? Everybody knows how to use these applications now, right? But you need to know what technical options exist. And strategically, and from a planning perspective, teams need to work together. Because in a lot of organizations, the telephony and the unified communications folks aren't necessarily talking to the digital workspace folks, right? This is a unified effort. If it's not unified, it's not going to be a lovely experience as you look to integrate these and roll them out to the organization. So with user experience top of mind, right? This is the number one factor. It's arguably the number one driving factor of deploying any collaboration solution. So when it actually hits the user's hands, how can you ensure that the user experience is going to be acceptable, and not just acceptable, really exceed their expectations? What are the operational aspects to achieve the desired outcome? Earlier today, I was on a meeting with an organization who's going down this path right now. I'm bringing these two together. The operational aspects, the true way you're going to get there. You have to plan way ahead. Big lengthy setback schedules just ensure not only that you can achieve it technically, but that the organization can adopt it, right? And as you deploy it operationally, not just from a management perspective, you know how it's being deployed. You have the constructs in place to measure the experience, and at the end of the day, the results to achieve the desired outcome. This ends up being a vital piece that's often overlooked. And what impact does your roadmap have on maintaining the desired interop and user experience? Okay, so depending on what path you go down, sometimes we choose it without looking at everything, right? And folks who have been down that path before, I've made this comment in each one of these that I've had, right? And we've got a slide coming up that visually depicts this. Microsoft missed with Link in Skype. A lot of organizations got it. Great messaging, whiteboarding, file collaboration product. Missed on the rich media side. All right, we do think they're going to get it right this time, but today we're going to focus heavily on somebody that already has it right and how you can leverage both together. So from a user experience perspective, just a couple of notes on this. This is the last thing that we want. And I can tell you when I go through the history section of this presentation, this was what the user experience was when these two tried to come together before. A lot of it had to do with adoption services in the way that the organization chose to deploy it and made decisions without the two working together. That is what's going to ensure a wonderful user experience. So, things to consider. How am I going to connect my existing Cisco UC infrastructure to my Microsoft environment? We're assuming that the majority of the organizations attending this session today have both. All right. If you're a Cisco UC shop and you have Google Productivity Suite or G Suite, and you're leveraging maybe Microsoft for a couple of other things, this may not be as applicable. But for folks who have Cisco Call Control, Cisco Video Infrastructure, and Cisco WEBEX, and are leveraging Microsoft productivity tools, right, or maybe even Microsoft Teams from a conferencing perspective, how are we going to bring these two worlds together? What options exist there? How can you ensure you provide a compelling user experience when you do that? What options do you have to integrate rich collab capabilities into the Microsoft application suite? Microsoft has done a much better job of it this time. So you're going to come up to a crossroads here. You're going to say, okay, Microsoft Voice and Microsoft Meetings work way better than it ever did. It's a nice meetings experience now. But I have this massive deployment of WebEx over here with thousands of users on it. What can we do? Do we just rip the Band-Aid off and choose one over the other? Do we implement a hybrid solution because we've got hundreds of video rooms that connect directly to WebEx? There's a number of options here that you need to consider that don't have an adverse effect on the user experience that already exists today. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about rooms specifically in today's session, but that is an animal in and of itself. All right, so if someone chooses to go down the path of deploying a Microsoft Teams room solution, yet they have Cisco Meetings platforms and Cisco Voice, how do you ensure that that endpoint in that room can access the PSTN or receive an inbound call? Or do you just revert back to the old ways and put multiple endpoints in the room? That's not a good user experience, okay? And this one's often overlooked, and I'll go back to the commodity statement. WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Skype, and Zoom are commoditized products now. Just about everybody in the world knows how to use them. Now, Microsoft Teams and WebEx Teams and Slack, right? They're a much richer collaboration platform, right? Because there's business messaging in there, there's file collaboration, there's true telephony, right? There's app integrations, there's bots, right? There's so many different things than just meetings. But what you have to consider is when you make a choice of the platform that you're going to use internally, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the organizations you collaborate with are going to choose. Because there's those three players, right? All with two gaining significant market share since COVID, being Zoom and Microsoft. There's going to be three out there. So how can you ensure that from your Microsoft Teams room, you're going to be able to join a WebEx meeting that somebody sends to you, or a Zoom meeting, or vice versa, okay? This is a big piece. It's great that you have rich collaboration internally. These collaboration applications are truly invaluable if you can leverage them with your partners and customers. So something to be considered. And then how much are we willing to invest in a comprehensive adoption services plan? Adoption services is vital here. No different than if you were to roll out a new digital workspace or virtual desktop infrastructure solution, or migrating from Windows 7 to Windows 10, or maybe half your organization is going to switch to Mac. There's so many things that you need to consider with regards to the end user. And adoption services is so much more than just training, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. It's more than training, it's communications, it's marketing, it's ongoing enablement, okay? And how much you're willing to invest in that, because it will fail. It will truly fail if you don't do a good job of this. From an operations perspective, so many things to consider, all right? And I could talk about this for 2 hours in and of itself, but this is nothing without the network. And the reason why it's always been about the network when it comes to rich media, right? Real-time traffic across the network. This is not client-server communications. It's often overlooked, right? If you don't specialize in VoIP or video communications, rich media is real-time. right? That means packets are flowing simultaneously between endpoints directly. So the path in between them is integral, right? That's why quality service is so important. Signaling is client server. Media is real time, right? So it is truly nothing without the network. Now let's add a whole nother dimension to that. Now we got hybrid cloud, right? Even if you're taking advantage of Cisco WEBEX calling, which is in the cloud, and Microsoft Teams for messaging, it's still hybrid cloud, right? And these guys are integrating their tenants together via direct connect services, all right? It makes it complex, but it's required, all right? So when you're gonna go down the hybrid cloud path, as you integrate these two solutions, you have to have the expertise in both, right? And you have to be paying attention to both sides. That's where that security and compliance thing comes in too. Multiple unified communications platforms to manage, yet keep compatible. Anybody who's focused on unified communications as the bigger component of their career, at least for the last 5 years plus, knows what it's like to manage a UC platform, right? They have simplified it tremendously. Cisco and Microsoft have both simplified it tremendously. Microsoft took a simple approach originally, which is why they fell down on the telephony side, all right? Got their act together and they're being successful this time with the architecture side of things and the features that folks require, actively adding those to the portfolio. That being said, you have to have specialized skill sets, right? And those specialized skill sets need to understand both sides of the house. They not only have to understand both sides of the house, you have to know from a versioning and dependency perspective where one can go without the other. And if you've got cloud and prem integrated, you've got something that you have greater control over, something that's a little more agile, just an additional level of focus and more operational overhead to keep them in line. This is arguably the most important one. When you think about the architecture, the infrastructure behind the scenes in the software back end, sure, that's a challenge in and of itself. But what about the devices that you're using to connect to it? So keeping client operating systems, the images on those, and the applications themselves governed, tested, and upgraded in lockstep is a challenge in and of itself. Right? Especially if one that you're administering yourself, again, compared to something that you've got on a little more agile methodology going up and down. Client side of this is integral, right? All the folks on the SMP side of the house on this call today have been managing UC environments for almost 20 years, right? This always ends up being one of the most often overlooked piece, right? And while we can always say it's nothing without the network or it's always the network, when it comes to software running on a mobile device or a laptop or a desktop or an endpoint in a room, that client operating system can end up being one of the roadblocks or one of the challenges all the time, right? So having a good focus and emphasis on this in-house is important. So I talked about adoption services. I'm not going to jump into this too much. It is not training. All right, adoption services. So SMP has a full-blown customer experience team focused on adoption services. And adoption services, while yes, we have professional trainers on staff who do on-site and virtual training, they do so many other things. They help with roadmaps. As somebody's migrating from one platform to another, they're looking at analytics and insights on how the technology and applications are being used to get better, right? We work with organizations to build communications plans and help marketing do a great job of not only educating the end users that something's coming, but also on how to use it, all right? And then it's something that just keeps going because there's constant feature enhancements, right? And while the organization has the ability to say, okay, I'm not going to roll that out right now, when you do, you still need to communicate that so you get the greatest ROI and the best adoption of that feature. And then, of course, onboarding new employees. So that's not a one-time thing, right? You can build a program that takes 2 months as you're rolling out a new product, but you can't stop there. You don't stop there, right? You're constantly hiring new people. So having that program aligned with things like video on demand, right? And sheets and conference rooms, right? On how to use the tech and really, you know, the genius bars, the smart desks. Adoption services is a big thing. And when it comes to something where your work lives, like these applications have become, so Microsoft Teams, WebEx Teams, Slack, right? More and more you use those, more and more your work lives there and you access there. So you have to know how to use them. Yeah, and then one of the last pieces with regards to operations, having been through this going back to 2001 and bringing these two vendors together, well, we're all in IT. And you can just about get everything to work the way that you want it to work in a lab. But not everything in a lab, right, that you get working makes sense in production. All right, and this is a great depiction of that. You got a rack of stuff running all the whether there's VPCs out to the Azure or Microsoft Cloud from this space in the bottom left of the graphic here, right where this rack's talking to from a Cisco perspective, or you got Cisco Cloud to Microsoft Cloud. But then you got this network sitting behind it, right? That's a traditional network architecture. These are all the things that need to be considered, right? So architecture's evolved tremendously now, and if you're well down the path of a next generation software-defined network with multi-cloud solutions already in place, this isn't going to be as big of a challenge for you. But point being is you can get a lot of things working in the lab, but that's not the way that it works in production. So jumping into the history of these two vendors working together. It's important for everybody to know, and Tarek and Dan use this when they're talking to clients as well. Cisco is one of the biggest Microsoft shops in the world. Seems crazy, right? Look at them as competing for a long time in this space. They use the Microsoft Productivity Suite, right? They're 75,000 employee organization, right? That does 50 billion a year. They're using Microsoft across the board. So they know that their applications have to work with Microsoft, right? Originally, their applications were built on Microsoft Server OS. They required Active Directory, SQL, and Exchange for their services. I know that says voicemail. That was very, very much an Exchange piece there that I'm referring to, their old Unity platform. But originally, Cisco's unified communications applications were all Microsoft, right? Ran on Microsoft Server and were dependent on all of their servers. So they had this inherent knowledge of the Microsoft platform in and of itself anyway. There's only 2 applications that remain that are running on Microsoft in their stack today, and they've got dozens of applications. One being Unified Contact Center Enterprise, right? So they're constantly working with Microsoft to make sure that their massive contact center platform, driving millions of agents around the world, revenue generating contact centers, have to work with Microsoft. And then their telepresence management suite, right? That remains, and that was purpose built to manage their legacy video infrastructure, but is still a vital component in their collaboration story today when on-prem for things like calendaring integration, Exchange booking solutions for services like one button to push on video endpoints in the conference room. Okay, so very, very tight integrations there. And that being said, they still have very, very tight integrations with AD and Exchange because of that. It's important to note that in the very, very beginning, while they were dependent on some Microsoft services, they also had a proprietary signaling protocol for VoIP, all right? And that was via SCINI, so it stands for the SCINI Client Control Protocol. It's SCCP, all right? And they realized very, very quickly, based on where the service provider industry was going, right? Because there's such a big player when it comes to the network infrastructure on that side of the house, that they really needed to look at embracing SIP. So they started to move to the SIP standard in 2006, knowing that that's where the industry was going. Microsoft Office Communications Server, right? So OCS or LCS, even before OCS, was about that 2004 or 5 timeframe as well. While they built originally on some Microsoft proprietary protocols and a flavor of SIP, that created tremendous interop issues for other platforms using standards-based SIP. Directory and messaging services integration started in the early 2000s, as I already alluded to, and that's very prevalent today. It's in every solution that we design when it comes to Cisco UC. That's where all its intelligence comes from. Unified messaging, right? So unified messaging, for those who don't know, is when you call a Cisco telephony platform, you leave a voicemail, and it automatically ends up in your email. But it doesn't just get forwarded to your email. It's far more unified than that, right? In the old days, it literally depended on Exchange, and the Unity server in Exchange had to sit in the same data center, right? It was that dependent, right? And they would even go as far as saying in the same rack. That's how the solution was supported. But insanely tight integration. When you think about marking a message as read in Outlook and it turning your message waiting indicator off on your IP phone, or deleting the voicemail message from your phone and having it automatically wiped out in Outlook, that's very rich integration. And that's what they mean by unified messaging. So I'm going to go pretty quick through these next 4, but it's important for you to know that going back to, let's just call it the mid-2000s, the Cisco Unified Personal Communicator Client came out as a next generation collaboration client on the desktop. So if you go back to the Office Communicator days with Microsoft, right, this is at the same time. Still dependent on Microsoft services. Your policy was controlled via GPO. It integrated with AD to get your contact lists, right? Had some calendaring integration, right? The cool thing about Cupsy, though, is it had rich media and very, very strong rich media. So you could use it as a soft phone, right, to call Bob's Pizza Shop or SMP, right? Or you could use it as a full-blown video client. The reason why I call this out specifically is it was very tight integration between the two platforms again. Then, if you go on the other side, here's Microsoft, Office Communicator, and Link. There was a solution called Cisco Unified Communications Integration for MOC or Link, where Cisco worked with Microsoft to put a form on the bottom of these clients where you could actually disable all of the MOC and Link calling features so you could continue to only have one call control platform in the environment, right? So what happened with this form is it truly registered the call manager. You could use it as a soft phone. It could control your hard phone. You would get presence between the two solutions, which was missing for the longest time. So another really, really rich integration. This, however, created a clunky user experience because there are a number of different calling options in the Link or MOC client. So via GPO, you would have to disable all that and gray all that out, but users would still see it. So without adoption and training, this didn't work for a lot of organizations. And again, the reason why this became important is it wasn't Cisco saying, I need to keep my market share when it comes to VoIP. A lot of organizations don't want both unified communications platforms setting up calls. Not only does it confuse the user, it wreaks havoc on the network. Your traffic patterns are different. And this applies today. So when Tarek gets to the calling solution, these are the things that you need to think about. If you're making computer-to-computer calls from Microsoft Teams or randomly joining a Microsoft Teams meeting for a client that's registered to the cloud, right? But you're using Cisco for voice calls, right? You want to bring these two worlds together. Think of the craziness when it comes to the network flow and the traffic patterns, okay? We already talked about presence and SIP interop and how important that is. It's great to know when somebody's on the phone so you don't bother them. Great to see the video camera over their name or their avatar, right? It's great to see content sharing in the application when you're sharing content from both sides of the house. Remote call control in Microsoft ended up being a big deal. So how could I actually make a call from my Cisco IP phone and take a Link client off hook, right? Or better yet, even have the ability to control my Cisco IP phone from a MOC client, right? These are the types of things that they worked on for years. And then this is the last piece of their rich history of great integrations until we get to the coming soon section where there's an unbelievable example of Microsoft and Cisco working together with Azure. But all the hybrid services via Cisco's Expressway appliance today, which is what connects you securely to the internet, other companies, and the WEBEX cloud, have cloud connectors that run on them. While they can run in the WEBEX cloud natively, you can also run them on the Expressway environment to connect you to AD, right? So directory connectors, calendaring connectors, and calling connectors. So just another example of them working together. So there was a lot there, right? And that is a really, really nice summary aside of what is happening going back to about 2019. This blue arrow across the bottom is indicative of how long Cisco's been really, really heavily focused on bringing these two worlds together. Because their idea is they just want people to be able to meet. And if you go up from LCS, so 2003 through 2005, very proprietary. OCS up through Link, very proprietary. They started to change a little bit with Link with regards to the standards-based protocols. Then they killed that product off, right? Because of the acquisition of the consumer Skype product, which was a smart acquisition at the end of the day from a brand perspective for Microsoft. But I think they realized what they bought after a little while. I think they should have kept going with Link personally. But Skype then hit the street, all right? And Skype had a lot of promise. Now, Skype, again, was a nice desktop productivity tool. But Skype, at the end of the day, missed the boat big on the voice and meeting side, all right? And then they followed Cisco and Slack with regards to a Teams client. And they waited for a couple of years, frankly. Cisco started theirs in 2014 with Project Squared and Spark, and Slack was already hitting the street. So when they embraced the business messaging side of things, I think they did a great job waiting until 17, because they not only saw where the industry was going, they learned a lot from those mistakes, and they realized how rich integrations to their own productivity suite would be game changers for them. Okay, so as Microsoft Teams gets released in 2017, and they look at changing their voice strategy to have both their own phone system and direct routing services, which we'll talk about, they've got the momentum that they need now. So 2 more slides, all right, before we jump into what's really here. All right, so in 2006 to 2013, Cisco owned the voice, video, and contact center in the majority of the meetings market. All right, truly, up until I think I just gave these stats to Tarek and Dan, WEBEX still has about 40% of the meetings market in the enterprise. We know due to COVID that that's going to change, simply because Cisco is not a consumerized brand, right? And they have no intentions on becoming that ever. That's why you never see marketing, right? They like to spend their time in the enterprise. But market share, tremendous market share. I mean, you could argue that Avaya, right, in 2006 to 2013 was right there with Cisco, and then there was some ShoreTel, Mitel. And then there's some great contact center players that are out now, but Cisco really had a lockdown on this in the enterprise. During this time frame, Microsoft owned the desktop, right? From a productivity and IM and in the desktop perspective, right? I mean, Google was just starting to sniff these type of things. So Microsoft had the lion's share of that market. Cisco went after real-time collab on the desktop and mobile device during this time frame. All right, so in about 2010, right, or even 2006, we talked about Cupsy, that client, right, into the 2008 time frame, and then they acquired Jabber, right, and then they went after it even harder there. Okay, this is where they started to butt heads again. All right, but interoperability desires were at an all-time high in 2011. And what's the reason for that? If you go back to the very first slide, they needed to talk. Everything needed to talk, right? And this type of work was becoming more and more popular, driven by mobility, Wi-Fi, and globalization. That's it. It's those 3 things. That's why we changed the way we work, right? So they were at an all-time high in 2011. Not as high as they are right now, but we'll get to that, because it teetered off because they couldn't make it work, or the experience in the end user wasn't good enough. It was complex and hard, in summary. 2013 to 2018, this was the result, right? I just spoke to this. Mobility drove the requirement for virtual real-time collab to an all-time high. Wireless became pervasive. Video became pervasive, right? It truly did, no more than it ever did with COVID. Right now, the rest of the world is using video. We knew our kids were using video, but video became pervasive in the enterprise. The cost-effective solutions came out. It was included in licensing agreements. You had to buy an endpoint, right? That's really what it came down to. And then workstream messaging applications took the industry by storm. And by that, I mean Teams, WebEx Teams, Slack, those types of applications. All right? But minimal interoperability was established in this 5-year time frame because of all the things that we've talked about to date. And if we go back to that operations slide, it's too complex to connect them. Too much operational overhead. We haven't even talked about costs yet. And we won't get into that in this session, but when you have them both running at the same time, that's the major factor to get all the service that you want. Engineering specialists, very specialized skill sets. 2013 to 18, Microsoft did not embrace standards-based protocols. You couldn't integrate well with Skype. It's proprietary. That hurt them. There were endpoint manufacturers, right, and folks like that, and then third-party ecosystem vendors that developed very specific products like Acano or Pexip, right, to where they could start to bring these solutions together by spending a lot of money on those infrastructure and applications that did transcoding on the fly between standards-based and non-standards-based, but still didn't get there because it was another investment. It was another solution that somebody had to understand. Clunky UX, right, the user experience we talked about being vital. Virtual desktop infrastructure, right, really taking off in this time frame, 2013 to 2018, and COVID's driving more of that digital workspace architecture as well, but making real-time media work in VDI, very difficult, okay? Both have had their own solutions, whether it's with Horizon View or Citrix, okay? But offloading the media from the desktop protocol and the streams to provide a great real-time media experience was challenging. You think it would be easier when you were on premise? The way the codecs are built now and the way that these cloud services are designed, you can do an even better job today. All right. And at the end of the day, so many failed expectations and promises. I can't tell you how many proof of values or proof of concepts we did trying to bring these two worlds together, right? Where a vendor said something was going to happen and it never came to light. Or when integrations were established, it just became a nightmare to manage. SMP did become the leader in the Northeast in Skype for Business and Cisco Video Interop. All right. Did that for many large organizations in our territory. There was a product called Cisco Meeting Server they acquired from Econo that did a great job of that. Now it's all going to be cloud to cloud or hybrid cloud. So I just talked about this, right? So how did you bring Skype and Cisco together during that time frame? So we had so many projects with large organizations and small organizations on this in all industries. Because for folks who went down the Microsoft path, when it came to the desktop side, but already had a large installed base of Cisco for telephony and video, wanted these two worlds to connect. This is an eye chart. It does visually depict two data centers along with the DMZ and the internet, but this is what it looked like. So for folks who had no expertise in this, right, or organizations who just didn't have enough people to get strong enough in it, and they depended on folks like us, became an animal to manage, right, at the end of the day, let alone set up. So this is all still supported today, by the way. We've got several organizations still running this who haven't went to Microsoft Teams yet. But the evolution is really to take these Skype pools that you could also take advantage of the cloud and get rid of a lot of this premise-based infrastructure internally, connect the two worlds together and let the endpoints hang off your internal network or home, right? So what does all that mean, right? Now we're going to jump into the stuff that for folks who haven't sat this session yet, because we've repeated it a couple of times, that you really came to see. We are circa 2010 right now. All right, so for folks who got into collaboration 5 years ago, or folks who went through it the last time, this is exactly like 2010, right? When Link really took off and folks had Cisco voice and video, right? We were having all of these same exact conversations. The architecture is a bit different now, right? And the way we work has continued to evolve, but interoperability is no longer desired, it's a must, right? And that's where we are today. So I'm here to say that Cisco and Microsoft are working closer together than they ever have. And for those who don't know, the individual who runs the collaboration technology group, well, they now have a new leader that they brought over from Box, who has a lot of applications other than collaboration. The real leader of the collaboration technology group came from Microsoft. And when he came over from Microsoft to Cisco, his vision was, okay, I'm going to go back over to Microsoft, right? Make sure that their next generation strategy works very, very well with Cisco so that they can really interoperate with all these other organizations who have the Cisco UC infrastructure in place. So that relationship has never been stronger. So what's possible, right, today? Where are we at when you're considering Microsoft Teams, premise-based Cisco UC, or WEBEX? And we're going to talk about what's possible today. I'm going to bring Tarek in here in a minute, and then we'll talk about what's coming soon. So if you're to look at this visual, right, it summarizes the productivity suite, right, at the end of the day on the left side with Microsoft when it comes to email and calendaring, right, the Office suite, SharePoint for file storage, team collaboration via Microsoft Teams, right? You look at the right side, you look at video, calling, devices, contact center is not visually depicted here, but this is really envisioning with that Microsoft Teams icon in the center, in the event that you are going down the Microsoft Teams path, which we assume many of those on this call are today, doesn't mean you have to get rid of the stuff on the right, all right? It doesn't mean that if you merge with a company and they have the stuff on the right, you can't make it work. If you go acquire a company and they have the stuff on the right, you can't make it work, right? It's going to come to, you could come to a crossroads 2-3 years from now as subscriptions may be running out or whatever, where you may look to make a different decision and maybe change your path. But this is what we're going to focus on now, all right? And because Microsoft's done a good job of opening up their APIs this time, they still have a long way to go for certain things like presence, as I alluded to. Cisco has worked closely with them to make sure that this interop is possible and established. So if you're using Microsoft 365, all right? Whether it's, you know, the legacy O365, some premise-based stuff, or you got a greenfield thing going in, you can integrate with WebEx meetings, WebEx Teams, which is Microsoft Teams from Cisco's perspective, WebEx calling, or their premise-based calling, or their rooms, right, at the end of the day, right? Because many customers are already using some form of this, right? Most are. But if you're going down the Teams path and you flow down to B, you can use Teams for just messaging and file collaboration and continue to use WebEx meetings, calling, or WebEx rooms, right? And if you go down to C and you're leveraging Microsoft Teams for messaging and meetings, doesn't mean that you need to get rid of your Cisco call control, your rich dial plan that's been massaged and implemented over a decade, right? Or any of your video infrastructure, whether that's premise-based or WebEx, right? So it's a distributed workload between both of them. So I'm going to have Tarek take you through quickly the WebEx integration out of Microsoft Teams, along with Cisco calling integration out of WebEx Teams, or sorry, Microsoft Teams. And then he's going to hand back to me. So Tarek?
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you can pass the ball over, we did awesome. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm just going to bring up the slide over here now. All right, wonderful. So as Sean alluded, we talked about different possible integrations that are available today. So I'm going to be really talking about what integrations are available from a MS Teams and Cisco perspective. Going to basically cover meetings, what the interface looks like, and then we'll jump into the calling section, and then followed by a quick demonstration on the cross launch. So, you know, you basically with the WebEx meetings, you can schedule, start, or join Cisco WebEx meetings, and invite people to join the meetings through, or actually using the WebEx personal rooms meetings directly from Microsoft Teams. One of the requirements is you must have a host account in the WebEx site to use this app. So this app basically is added within the Microsoft Teams. You know, when you go under App Space, you're able to quickly add this WebEx Teams WebEx app within the Microsoft Teams client. And in terms of the configuration, there is some requirements. As I mentioned that for WebEx account is enabled for a personal room, you can also use the app to share a link to a meeting in your personal room. There are some steps that must be completed by WebEx site administrator, while other must be done by the Microsoft Office 365 Global Administrator. But once the configuration is done, you're able to schedule a meeting, host a meeting, and being able to invite people to join the meeting. Moving on to the next step here, I'm just going to cover calling real quick. On calling side, it is simple to deploy client-side integration, which works with your existing Cisco calling apps. When I say Cisco calling app, it basically is the Cisco Jabber or the WebEx Teams client that is registered to your on-prem communications manager. For some of you that are basically learning this from a WebEx team, I just wanted to point out that as we know, the Jabber client registers to Communications Manager from a software perspective. You can also register the WebEx Teams client from a software perspective directly natively to Communications Manager. And the client side really means there's no change in the infrastructure or the configuration. It's basically already configured devices in the CUCM, and you go into your WebEx Microsoft Teams client and add those apps. This is, again, a site admin would have to configure the permissions, proper permissions, and the users basically will pin the apps in their on their Microsoft client side and able to leverage the apps. I'm going to cover some of the screenshots following, see what the experience looks like. So as you can see, you can start a Cisco call from an existing conversation by clicking on the call button in the conversation bar. On the top, on the left side, you can see, so within the Teams app, all you have to do is just click on the icon. I know they are when you log in, you will also see there's a phone icon from within Microsoft Teams. And we've talked to customers, and from an end user perspective, it would be great that we use one option rather than, because it will be really confusing from the users to use which phone button icon, which icon to use. So preferably once you have the integration enabled, it is recommended that we do recommend that you turn off the calling piece from within the Microsoft Teams client. Otherwise, the user will get really confused, and Sean did talk about that earlier as well. Also, you can see on the right side, there's a dial but the pad basically comes up as soon as you click on the Jabber icon. So based on whether you're going to be using Cisco Jabber or WEBEX Teams client, the dial pad comes up. You're able to basically dial a number or a CPRI, and the call basically goes out. So this is an experience from a cross-launch perspective. Obviously, you would have to have a Jabber client installed on the desktop, and all we're doing is just invoking the Jabber client by just clicking on the icon. It will bring up a dial pad, you dial a number from the dial pad, and a call goes out from the Jabber, and I will demonstrate that at the end of the couple of these slides. This basically, again, from my MS Teams conversation, during the conversation, you click on the call button, which escalates to a Cisco voice or video call. And that's basically available when you are in a conversation. So when you search up a user and you are in a conversation, you can have a voice or video call. This is, again, a little bit more information on the Jabber side. So Jabber icon to launch a dial pad and then enter the phone number or the CPRI and the click on call. That option is available as well. And all of these options that I've talked about so far, Dan is going to share a link at least on the WebEx meeting side as well as on the calling side, how to really configure these features that are available today on your Microsoft Teams side. With the Outlook contact search, today the Outlook contact search, you can search local Outlook contacts, type a contact name. Cisco app will show the matches and select the right contacts to call. Right now, it is only limited to local Outlook contacts, but as far as searching the Azure directory, the search for Azure directory is in beta right now, and it should be available by end of this month. So that's an enhancement that Cisco is working on right now, Cisco and Microsoft, and that will be available by end of this month. So from integration perspective, the integration support the entire Cisco portfolio and provides the flexible work style. You can use your desk phone call control, the soft phone, call your existing room devices from within Microsoft Teams, and also the work remotely using Cisco Expressways. Whether the Jabber is configured on-prem, but you also obviously have the option where the Jabber can still be registered over Expressway. It will still work from an integration perspective and within the cross launch. Again, from a platform perspective, the integration, it's supported whether it's the on-prem communications manager, Jabber is registered to on-prem communications manager, or other platforms that Cisco support, whether it's a hosted platform, UCM Cloud, or WebEx calling. The integration from within Microsoft Teams, that is supported. So a cross-launch option that we talked about earlier, or being able to join WebEx. So with that, also, how do we really deploy the workflow is basically the configuration task that needs to be done by the Microsoft Teams site admin. Basically, admin adds the chosen Cisco apps from the MS Teams App Store. And the Cisco apps can be deployed to all groups or certain users. It's basically based on your setup policy, and then users basically can click to call in conversations or open up the dial pad as we just talked about earlier. And Dan has already shared the link, so I'm going to just go ahead and quickly show a demonstration. As you can see on my left side, this is the Microsoft Teams client, and I'm just going to go back to the chat window here. So first, I'm going to quickly show that if you were to search up a user, I've got Sean here, and I've sent him a message. For instance, you are in a conversation with Sean. Once you have the app added, how does the app get added? it will basically will be available here when you go into your app, the 3 dots in there. You can add apps, so you can pin those apps. Right now, I just pinned Jabber app in there, and Jabber app is available right here as well. So while I'm in a conversation, I can just click on the app, and it'll just bring up, and I am able to basically pick a USP for Sean, or just dial his work number, and the call will go out. So that's basically, and right now, I've got a Jabber client opened up, and it's registered over MRA. So if I click on call right now, it will basically use Jabber right there. It's going to hang up. It will basically launch Jabber, and since I've got it open right there on the right side, it basically initiated the call. Same thing with the dial pad. If I click on the icon right here, it brings up the dial pad. I can dial a number, and I can just click on call here. So the call will go out again from the Jabber. I'm just going to hang up the call here. Or I can just dial a CPUI, and we'll basically, it's that easy in terms of being able to launch, cross-launch, and able to place an outbound call. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Sean. Sean?
Thank you, Tarek.
Yep.
Oh, you can see my desktop okay. Okay. So I'm just going to focus on really the reverse of this. So for those who know about WebEx Teams, Tarek just had on the right of Microsoft, well, he was using Jabber and WebEx Teams look the same now, but that's similar to what WebEx Teams looks like, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But the same rich file collaboration capabilities that exist in Microsoft Teams with their productivity suite also exist in WebEx Teams. And the reason why we want to highlight that today for folks who have large WebEx meeting subscriptions, there's a lot of advantages of leveraging WebEx Teams for in-room experiences when it comes to wirelessly sharing content on the fly to displays, right? Leveraging it as a soft phone, because if you have a call manager or a WebEx calling dial plan, or just click to join and start meetings straight from the app. So for those who choose to go down that path, because it's got its rich messaging features as well, it's important to know that you get the same file collaboration experience with WebEx Teams that you get with Microsoft Teams, and they've had this for certainly over a year now. I'm losing track now at this point, but all the rich experience that you would expect, right? So you can link to specific online folders or SharePoint sites. You can drop only OneDrive linked files into one-to-one spaces or team spaces, right? All the co-editing that you would expect exists in the client and the like. So for folks who are choosing to go down this path, this is all possible, and I'll actually demo this for you in a moment. Really, this slide just visually depicts that, okay, when you're in a team space view, the file not only shows up here, but there's also files across the top, which I'll show you so you can see them individually, whether it's linked to an online folder or not, right? There's the WebEx Teams file activity view, right? So this is actually a little dated. That moved over to the top. And then there's the co-editing, as we talked about. As you can see, there's multiple people, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker in this visual, collaborating on a file real time, right, from within Word Online. All right, so if I were to just kick out real quick and show you what that looks like. So I'm filtered into an existing space here right now. So as Tarek just showed you, he just showed you Jabber, WebEx Teams looks the same. The reason why Cisco's done that, for folks who have had an installed base of Jabber over a long period of time, they wanted to make it easier on the end user to migrate to the cloud when they were ready to do so, because their licensing entitles them to that. Any calling enterprise agreement or WebEx meetings agreement entitles them to messaging, right? So when they're ready to go there, they can choose to do that, and they'll have the same exact experience. If I were to go into this, so if I were just to drill in to that specific space, all right, and I just wanted to OneDrive attach a file, I could actually go out here. It's going to go out specifically to my OneDrive. I could go into my documents folder. I could drill down into this presentation, let's say, specifically, right? And I could select that presentation and drop it in the space. All right, and you could do it for anyone, people in your org, people with existing access. You can allow editing. etc. Right? And when I hit those, apply those settings here, you'd be like, well, that was you did that on a one-off basis, right? Can I have some policy that makes it so my repository is Microsoft specifically? I can only attach files from Microsoft specifically, or can I link a space or an entire team to an online folder? The answer is yes, right? But before I show you how to do that, this visual right here is an indication that it's OneDrive linked, all right? I can pop that open here, and it goes right out to PowerPoint Online, pulls up the file. Anybody in this WebEx team space has access to it. If I allowed them to edit it, we could, all right? The other option that exists is you can go into the content tab specifically. Oh, thank you, Dan. Great present. Thanks, Dan, for commenting. But if you go into the content slide, this existing space, because it's been around for years, this collaboration pre-sale space, is not currently linked to an online folder. But just to show you how simple that is, right? All I would have to do is go out and hit link to an online folder. Right? It's going to take me out again to my OneDrive, or where my SharePoint sites are. I could literally go in, and if I wanted to give them access to this entire client solutions folder, I could actually hit open right now, and they get access to everything that sits beneath it, all within this content pane of glass. All right, so slick, this is where your whiteboards are. This is where any links are, quick access, all searchable. All right, so we wanted to make sure that you guys saw that this is all possible from WebEx as well, going to the Microsoft side. Okay, all right. So back over to the presentation. So what's new? All right, this isn't what's coming. This is what's new. All right, so we wanted to make sure that we talk about a recent announcement that everybody has been asking for, especially folks who have Cisco Unified Communications, because they likely already have Cisco Unified Border elements in their environment. Microsoft has two options to really enable or deliver voice to the Microsoft Teams side of the house. You can actually go with their phone system plan, right, and truly take your subscription or agreement with Microsoft up by enabling the phone system side of the house, which is a $1 increment for every single user who's going to take advantage of that, all right? Or you can go with direct routing, and the Cisco Voice Gateway or Unified Border element is now supported for Microsoft Direct Routing. So what do we mean by that? At the end of the day, there's two options, all right, for Teams and Skype for Business Online to take advantage of Microsoft's voice services. You can go through Microsoft directly and their carrier services, right, and get bills from them for PSTN access to and from. Now, for folks who have a large Cisco UC environment, think about that for a minute, right? You're not going to have two separate voice solutions on your network with DIDs pinned up on this side, all right, through Microsoft, and DIDs pinned up on your Cisco side. Completely separate numbers for your end users, right? They might have a Cisco hard phone on their desk and a Microsoft Teams client on their desktop, two different telephone numbers, right? Not as important when you're making outbound calls because you can mask stuff. Very important when you're talking about inbound. So direct routing not only gives you flexibility to integrate with things that you may already have on your network, right? Also gives you the flexibility in the future to do things like fork calls and simultaneously ring a hard phone while a Teams client is being run, all right? This is very similar to that RCC or remote call control capability that I was talking about earlier. So there's some advantages. While Microsoft has certified some other session border controllers, there's some advantages of leveraging Cube. First of all, Cube does a lot of other things, right? So if you're a Cisco voice shop and you're going to have hard phones or a contact center for a long period of time, you may be able to integrate directly with that Cube, all right? Assuming it will scale and support it and you're upgraded to the right iOS version, right? And it doesn't impact the other services. Also, you understand the support, you understand that ISR platform, if you choose to go physical or virtual, you have the ability to do that. SMP has this integrated with our sandbox right now. All right, so Tarek and team integrated direct routing via our Cube and our tenant, right, our lab tenant for Microsoft a few weeks back. All right, and this was announced as a generally available supported solution right around the Cisco Live timeframe a few weeks ago. But there's so many other, Cube's massively deployed, has a very, very large development team and effort around continuing to make sure that this ends up not just being the SBC for enterprises, but at the end of the day, SBC for service provider solutions too. Okay. visual depiction here and some specifics around what is supported. All right, so today it's only between the phone system and the PSTN. So what does that mean? You're not going to hook this into the Cisco UCM platform yet. All right, all those things are being worked on, right? And that's going to be done. There'll be a different architecture for that specifically, but you can leverage Cube as an SBC directly out of Teams for calls inbound and outbound. All right. iOS XE 7.2.1R only today, right? So latest version and then all versions thereafter. Interworking with UCM endpoints, right? So you can see the availability is planned for August. Well, they say July 2020. I think the update we got, Tarek and Dan, was August at the earliest. The same thing for media bypass. Now, for folks who, let's say, don't have Cisco UC and still want to use a Cisco border element for their SBC, it requires trunk licenses in that instance where it's greenfield, but it also obviously requires Cube trunk licenses if you're a Cisco UC shop. So that's always been a session-based licensing solution for the past however many years they've supported SIP trunking. Okay. So that was direct routing. And before I move on, very, very popular request. All right, so this is when we're working with all of our organizations right now, how can I at least make an outbound call from Microsoft Teams, right? Tarek took you through cross-launching a Cisco soft client that has end-to-end dial plan and call control access. That's a great solution, right? I think if Cisco gets it to where you actually don't see Jabber pop, for example, right, or WEBEX Teams pop, it'll be even better. But for folks who are truly looking at potentially going down a Microsoft telephony path, Cube can be that device for you. So what's coming soon? All right, what's coming soon? And I put the word Cisco in here. It's really the certified video interop gateway. All right, is also what a lot of organizations are waiting for. And the whole purpose of the CVI integration, and there's a couple of high-level architecture diagrams here in a few slides, is to bring the Cisco video in WebEx world together with Microsoft Teams. So it really goes two different directions, right? It allows you to join Microsoft Teams hosted meetings at the end of the day from a Cisco video endpoint. So an organization that has dozens, hundreds of Cisco video endpoints in their huddle spaces, their regular conference rooms, boardrooms, lobbies, training centers, whatever it may be, will be able to leverage the CVI to join a Microsoft Teams meeting with a pretty rich experience. There's a WebRTC generally available solution out today. That's not a good experience. When you share content, video goes away. This brings the traditional in-room video experience that you're used to with Cisco to light, including things like one button to push. All right, so for folks who have Cisco video endpoints today, if you schedule a WebEx meeting and you add that room to the meeting invite, all the meeting details go down to the endpoint. You get a big green button on your room to start or join the meeting, and that's all you ever have to know, right? You could also start it from your mobile device or your laptop. But that being said, this is going to allow you to do that with Microsoft Teams, okay? This would be an example layout, right? So you've got the dual screen on the left, right, for the video participants. You got both Cisco and Microsoft participants in that, with the active speaker being prominent on the display of choice. And then in the event that somebody shares content from the Microsoft Teams side of the house, you've got another large room device here. Video stays on the display of choice with the other parties dropping down as the movie strip across the bottom and the content share takes over the right side. So you probably say, what is this? Like really, how does this work, right? What these video integrations that Microsoft is going out and certifying are, so the Blue Jeans of the world have one, right? There's a few others that have worked on this. It's truly that vendor building their own tenant in the Azure cloud, right? That is going to be maintained by that vendor. So in this case, Cisco, right? Where they build all their communication services, connections, bridging resources, transcoding resources, and the likes in the Azure side, and then securely connect that to the Cisco private cloud. Now, for those who are data center folks in the shop, and you know a little bit about where this infrastructure sits, a great example would be Equinix, right? So Equinix has infrastructure for AWS, Azure, Google, CenturyLink, Salesforce, Zerto, service providers, Cisco's private data center infrastructure, right? So Equinix is kind of it's a cloud adjacent colo, if you will, where it's very easy for Cisco to come out of the Microsoft cloud and plug right into their cloud, right? Lower latency connections, taking advantage of a cloud exchange network, all right? That's what they're doing here. So why is that important? Sure's a great experience, knowing how real-time media works, okay? On its release, when it comes out here in the next month or two, it will be, you will be able to support on-prem registered devices in the event that you deploy a WEBEX Edge appliance, all right? Or the Cisco telepresence endpoints would need to be cloud registered to the WEBEX control hub, all right? So very, very excited about this, as are a lot of organizations, right, that want to continue to not just get a longer investment out of their Cisco video infrastructure, but have grown very, very accustomed to that experience, right? So no adoption services necessary, right? And actually just a wonderful experience in general, and a wonderful looking endpoint. One button to push. We talked about this in the very, very beginning, and I mentioned it's supported for cloud registered or WEBEX Edge for devices. This ends up being the calendar service. So we talked about this earlier in the meeting, where you talk about cloud to cloud integrations. So you can have your calendar service spun up on the WEBEX control hub side, integrated with Exchange in the O365 side, which ensures that you'll still get that big green button on the Cisco Touch 10 in the conference room for starting and joining a Microsoft meeting. What does the media path look like for those who care a little bit more about the networking side of the house? Of course, we don't get into the premise side of things here, where the endpoints themselves sit, but pretty straightforward, all right, when it comes to what the media path looks like. You got the single stream media coming from the Cisco side of the house, right, until you hit the tenant on the Microsoft Azure side where it gets converted into the Microsoft Teams side, right? So all these things are being bridged in the Microsoft Azure cloud, right? And as you look at, you get one video stream per one content stream. These are some of the things that we talked about in the beginning. But when it comes to media, right, all this stuff's going over to Azure, and that ends up being a really, really important piece. Okay, and this is what I meant by the hybrid services, and well, less complex than you would have considered it a long time ago, because this type of integration is just more and more common across all our applications. So with that, I'll check the time here. We're at 11:40, so we finished a little bit early. That is all we had for content today, with an emphasis on focusing on the newer things with direct routing and CVI. As CVI gets closer and closer to release, we will continue to keep all of you up to date. And before we open it up for questions, I would also say that we're here for you, right? When it comes to, if you guys need to have workshops, if you want to talk about design, if you just want to bring us in for product updates, if you need help with any of the integrations that we showed you, if you're interested in a proof of concept or value on how these things come together, this is something that we're very, very close to, and that because of the sheer amount of collaboration clients that we have in the territories that we serve, we want to make sure that we're there to assist you as much as possible.